He threatened to kill me if I ever left him, so I waited until he was asleep and did the unthinkable. I still remember how my hands trembled that night, how the floorboards creaked under my careful steps, how every sound seemed to echo through our little house like a gunshot. But that's jumping way ahead in my story. You deserve to know how I ended up there, how a wedding ring became the heaviest chain I'd ever wear. My name is Eleanor Jane Wilson. Most folks just call me Ellie, and I'm 74 years old now. I'm sitting here at my kitchen table in my little apartment in Springfield, Missouri, with a cup of coffee that's gone cold because I've been lost in these memories again. The memories I kept hidden for so many years, like bruises under long sleeves in the middle of summer. At 18, I thought I had found love. Instead, I had walked into a cage, one with golden bars that everyone admired from the outside, while I slowly suffocated on the inside. For nearly 40 years, I smiled when folks asked about my marriage, while my soul screamed silently behind my eyes. You know, they say time heals all wounds. Well, I'm not so sure about that. Some wounds just become part of you, like the creaky knee I got falling off my daddy's tractor when I was 9, or the little scar above my eyebrow from chicken pox. But the wounds Robert gave me, those were different. Those were meant to break not just my body, but my spirit too. I remember the day I met him like it was yesterday, though it was back in 1960. I was working at Woolworth's behind the lunch counter. My hands smelled like pickle juice and hamburger grease, and my feet ached something terrible in those hard shoes they made us wear. The radio was playing It's Now or Never by Elvis, and Mrs. Henderson was complaining about her tuna melt being too dry when in he walked. Robert Wilson was the kind of handsome that makes a young girl's heart forget to beat for a second. Tall, with shoulders like a quarterback and a smile that could charm a bird right out of a tree. He was wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up just so, and he had these eyes, Lord have mercy, these eyes that looked right through you like he could see every secret you ever had. He sat down at my counter, ordered a chocolate malt, and called me darling in a voice smooth as warmed honey. By the time he left, he had my phone number written on a napkin, and I had butterflies doing somersaults in my stomach. I was just a simple girl from a family where nobody went to college. My daddy worked at the tire factory, and Mama kept house and sang in the church choir on Sundays. They raised me to believe that a good husband was the best thing a girl could hope for. He's got a steady job at the bank, my mama said, when I brought Robert home to meet my parents. And he comes from good people. Daddy just nodded his approval, patting Robert on the back like he'd won some kind of prize. Nobody thought to ask if he was kind or gentle or whether he'd respect me. Those weren't the questions folks asked back then. Springfield, Missouri, 1960. It was a different world back then. Kennedy was running for president, Elvis was on the radio, and most folks still believed that a woman's place was in the home. Our little neighborhood was as American as apple pie. White picket fences, Sunday potlucks after church, and everybody knowing everybody's business. I grew up in a small white house on Maple Street. My daddy's old Chevy always parked out front, Mama's flower beds lining the walkway. Inside, the smell of fresh-baked cookies seemed to linger in the curtains, and the black and white TV in the corner only got 3 channels. Mama kept a spotless home, floors you could eat off of, she'd say. And Daddy worked hard at the tire factory, coming home with grease under his fingernails that never quite washed away. A lady always keeps a tidy home, Mama would tell me while teaching me to fold fitted sheets just so. And a good husband needs a hot meal waiting when he gets home. I soaked up these lessons like a sponge, believing with all my heart that being a good wife was the highest calling a girl like me could aspire to. Our family Bible sat prominently on the coffee table, and every Sunday morning we'd put on our best clothes and walk the 3 blocks to First Baptist. The ladies would be in their pastel dresses and white gloves, hair done up in neat little curls. The men in pressed suits, nodding solemnly to each other before the service. That's where good girls met good boys, under the watchful eyes of their parents and the Lord. But I met Robert at work, which was scandalous enough in my mama's eyes. A bank man shouldn't be eating at a lunch counter, she whispered to me after meeting him. What she meant was, he was too good for a girl like me, with just a high school diploma and hands that smelled of diner food. Our courtship was quick, just like most were back then. 6 months of chaperoned dates, to the movies to see Psycho, where he held my hand during the scary parts, to the state fair, where he won me a teddy bear I still have somewhere, to church picnics, where he charmed all the old ladies with his manners. By Christmas, he had asked my daddy for my hand, and I had a modest diamond ring that caught the light in ways that made my heart skip. We married the following June. I wore my mama's dress, altered to fit my smaller frame. The church was decorated with white carnations and baby's breath. My best friend since 3rd grade, Betty, was my maid of honor in a powder blue dress that made her look like a movie star. The reception was in the church basement, punch and cake and little sandwiches with the crusts cut off. It was everything a girl like me had been taught to dream of. Our first apartment was small but nice, nicer than what most newlyweds started with. Robert insisted on a place in the better part of town, even though the rent was steep. "We have to live somewhere befitting my position at the bank," he'd said. I was so proud to be Mrs. Wilson, keeping our little home while my husband went off to work in his crisp suits. Those first few months were sweet as honey. I'd wake early to make his breakfast. Eggs fried just the way he liked them, toast with butter and jam, coffee strong enough to put hair on your chest, as my daddy would say. I'd pack his lunch in the brown leather briefcase his parents had given him as a wedding present. And I'd spend my days cleaning, cooking, and waiting for him to come home. The radio kept me company during those long days alone. I'd sing along to the Supremes and dance around our living room with the mop as my partner, or I'd sit by the window with my sewing, listening to the soap operas and dreaming about the babies we'd have someday, filling our home with laughter and tiny footprints. It was subtle at first, the way things changed. So subtle I can't even tell you exactly when the shift happened. Maybe it was when he frowned at the blue dress I wore to church, saying the color was too bright, too attention-seeking. Or when he checked the mileage on the car after I'd driven to visit my mama, questioning every extra mile. Or perhaps it was the way he'd quiz me about my day. Who had I talked to? Had any men looked at me? Why was dinner 3 minutes late? "I just want to take care of you," he'd say, tucking my hair behind my ear in that gentle way that still made my stomach flutter. "You're my wife now, my responsibility." And because that's what I'd been raised to believe, that a husband was the head of the household, that his word was law, I smiled and nodded and tried harder to be the perfect wife. "Marriage takes work," my mama told me when I mentioned casually that Robert seemed particular about things. "Men need to feel respected in their own homes." So I swallowed my questions and focused on learning exactly how he wanted things done. Robert Wilson wasn't always the monster he became. That's the thing that haunts me most, even now. The man I married had a smile that lit up rooms. He'd bring me wildflowers he'd picked on his way home from work, just because. He'd hold my hand during thunderstorms because he knew they scared me silly. When did that man disappear? When did his eyes turn cold as January frost? It happened so gradually, like water wearing down stone. One drop at a time, until suddenly the solid ground beneath my feet had been carved away. I remember the first time I saw a glimpse of what was coming. We'd been married about 4 months when Robert's boss invited us to dinner at his home. I spent all day getting ready, setting my hair in rollers, ironing my best dress, even splurging on a new shade of lipstick. Cherry Blossom, it was called. I thought I looked pretty as a picture. "What in God's name is that on your face?" Robert said when he came home and saw me. His voice was quiet, but something in it made my skin prickle. "Just a little lipstick," I said, my hand going to my mouth, "for the dinner party." He took out his handkerchief and held it out to me. "Wipe it off. My wife doesn't need to paint herself up like some streetwalker." I did as I was told, my cheeks burning with shame. At the dinner party, Mrs. Jenkins, the boss's wife, wore lipstick the color of ripe strawberries. Robert complimented her on how lovely she looked. That night, I told myself it was just nerves. He wanted to make a good impression. He was under pressure at work. I made excuses for him the way you might make excuses for a child who's acting out because they're overtired. The Robert I thought I knew would return in flashes. He'd bring home a box of chocolates for no reason. He'd take me to the drive-in and hold my hand across the seat of the car. He'd tell me I was beautiful while we lay in bed, the moonlight spilling through the curtains I'd sewn myself. Those moments kept me hoping, kept me believing that the other moments, the cold silences, the sharp criticisms, the tight grip on my arm when I spoke to the neighbor boy too long, were just temporary storms that would pass. My parents noticed something was off when we visited for Sunday dinners. "Everything okay with you two?" Daddy asked once, his eyes narrowing as he watched Robert check his watch for the third time in an hour. "Just fine, Daddy," I chirped, too bright, too quick. "Robert's just been real busy at the bank. They're talking about a promotion." Robert smiled his public smile, the one that showed all his teeth but never reached his eyes. He put his arm around my shoulders, his fingers digging in just a little too hard. "Ellie's been a real trooper about all the hours I've been putting in. Best wife a man could ask for." My mama beamed. My daddy nodded. And I felt the pressure of Robert's fingers, like individual promises of what would happen if I ever said otherwise. The rules started small. Don't wear perfume. He didn't like the smell. Don't talk to Mr. Peterson next door. Robert didn't trust the way the man looked at me. Don't visit my friend Betty without calling him at work first to let him know exactly when I'd leave and return. Don't spend more than $20 at the grocery store without discussing it with him first. Each rule seemed reasonable on its own. He was my husband. He was looking out for our best interests. That's what I told myself. Then came the day I ran into my old high school friend Tommy at the grocery store. We chatted for maybe 5 minutes about nothing important. His mother's health, my parents, the weather. I mentioned it to Robert that night over dinner, just casual conversation about my day. The pot roast I'd spent hours preparing ended up against the wall. Gravy dripped down the floral wallpaper like tears. "You think I don't know what men like Tommy want?" Robert's voice was deadly quiet. "You think I don't know what you were really doing? Flaunting yourself in front of an old flame?" "It wasn't like that," I whispered, my hands shaking so bad I had to hide them in my lap. "We were just talking, Robert. I swear on the Bible." He grabbed my wrist then, hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises that lasted a week. "Don't you ever speak to another man without my permission. Do you understand me, Eleanor? Do you understand what you've done?" I nodded, too terrified to speak. And that night, he made me sleep on the couch as punishment. The next morning, he brought me coffee in bed, kissed my forehead, and told me he forgave me. Told me he just loved me so much he couldn't bear the thought of losing me. And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. Because that's what you did back then. You made your bed and you lay in it. "Till death do us part," the preacher had said. Nobody told me those words might become a prison sentence. Robert insisted we try for a baby right away. "A child will settle you down," he said, as if I was the wild one, as if I was the one who needed controlling. Month after month, I prayed for a baby, thinking it would fix everything. When my monthly visitor came, I'd cry in the bathroom, quietly, so Robert wouldn't hear and get angry at yet another failure. Now, looking back all these years later, I thank the good Lord above that no child ever came. Can you imagine? Being tied to that man forever through a child? Sometimes God's mercies come disguised as disappointments. By our second anniversary, Robert had rules for everything. What time I got up in the morning, 5:30 sharp, to make his breakfast. What I could wear, nothing above the knee, no bright colors that might attract attention. Who I could talk to, basically just him, my parents on supervised visits, and the grocer, but only about groceries. I lived my life like I was walking on eggshells, always watching my step, always careful not to make a sound that might crack the fragile peace. The telephone became both my lifeline and my tormentor. Robert would call randomly throughout the day, sometimes 3-4 times, just to check that I was home. "Just wanted to hear your voice, darling," he'd say, but we both knew what he was really doing. If I didn't answer by the third ring, there'd be hell to pay when he got home. "Where were you?" he'd demand, his face inches from mine. "In the bathroom," I'd stammer, or "just hanging laundry out back." Sometimes the truth satisfied him. Sometimes nothing would. Our house became my cage. The windows that once let in cheerful morning light now seemed like taunting glimpses of a freedom I couldn't reach. I'd watch the neighborhood women chatting on sidewalks or driving off to bridge club meetings and feel a loneliness so deep it ached in my bones. Even the mailman stopped trying to make small talk after Robert complained to the post office about him harassing me. I thought about running to my parents, but what would I say? Robert gets angry sometimes. In those days, folks didn't air their dirty laundry. Besides, my daddy thought Robert hung the moon, and Mama always said a wife's duty was to stand by her husband, for better or worse. "Every marriage has hard days," Mama told me when she noticed a bruise on my arm that my cardigan sleeve had failed to cover. "Your daddy and I had our rough patches too. You just gotta stay strong, pray about it, and remember your vows." I nodded and pulled my sleeve down, wondering if my daddy had ever thrown Mama against a wall for burning the toast. Somehow, I didn't think so. But what did I know? Maybe every wife lived like this, behind closed doors, plastering on smiles for Sunday church and hiding bruises under high collars and long sleeves. The first time Robert hit me, really hit me, not just a grip too tight or a shove, was over mashed potatoes. They were lumpy. That was my crime. The potatoes were lumpy, and his mother never served lumpy potatoes. His hand connected with my cheek so fast, I didn't even see it coming. The force of it knocked me sideways off my chair. I remember staring up at him from the floor, my ears ringing, tasting blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. He looked as shocked as I felt. For a moment, just a moment, the old Robert flickered in his eyes, horrified, remorseful. He knelt beside me, gathered me in his arms, and cried like a baby. "I'm so sorry, Ellie. I don't know what came over me. Work's been so stressful, and I just snapped. It'll never happen again, I swear to God. Please forgive me, baby, please." I believed him. That's the thing about hope. It'll make a fool of you every time. I believed him because I needed to, because the alternative was accepting that the man I'd promised my life to was capable of hurting me deliberately, and that thought was too terrible to bear. The next morning, he brought me breakfast in bed, pancakes with strawberries arranged in a little heart. He'd called in sick to work, the first time ever, just to spend the day making it up to me. We drove out to the lake, had a picnic, and he held my hand and promised 1,000 times it would never happen again. 3 weeks later, he backhanded me for talking too long to the minister after church. A month after that, it was a shove that sent me into the coffee table because dinner was 10 minutes late. Each time, the apologies grew shorter. The gifts grew smaller. The periods of sweet Robert became briefer until they disappeared altogether. I learned to navigate his moods like a sailor reading storm clouds. I could tell by the sound of his car in the driveway what kind of evening we'd have. I knew by the way he hung his hat whether to speak or stay silent. I became an expert at making myself small, at being invisible in my own home. Our third Christmas together, my parents gave me a little transistor radio, a beautiful thing with a red plastic case and a gold dial. "So you can listen to your shows while you do your housework," Mama said, beaming with pride at such an extravagant gift. That radio became my secret joy. I'd keep it low, always ready to switch it off if the phone rang or if Robert came home unexpectedly. For a few hours each day, music and voices filled our house, reminding me that a whole world existed beyond our walls. I'd dance with my mop to Be My Baby by the Ronettes, or sit by the window with my mending, losing myself in As the World Turns. In those moments, I could almost forget the bruises hidden beneath my house dress. I could almost pretend I was just like any other young wife, waiting for her husband to come home, not dreading the sound of his key in the lock. I need to pause for a moment and ask you something important. I want to say to anyone listening to my story right now. Have you ever felt trapped by someone who was supposed to love you? Like you're slowly disappearing, bit by bit, until you barely recognize yourself? If you're nodding right now, please know you're not alone. Leave a comment saying, "I deserve better." Because you do, honey. You truly do. And sometimes just seeing those words can be the first step to believing them. Now, let me tell you what happened next. It was a Tuesday in April 1964, one of those perfect spring days where the air smells like promise and new beginnings. I remember because the windows were open, letting in a breeze that made the curtains dance. I had the radio on, listening to Roy Orbison singing Pretty Woman while I ironed Robert's shirts. I didn't hear his car pull up. Didn't hear the front door open. The first warning I had was the radio suddenly going silent, yanked from its plug, and then Robert standing there, his face twisted with rage, the cord wrapped around his hand. "What did I tell you about this?" he hissed, holding up my little red radio like it was something filthy. "What did I tell you about filling your head with this garbage?" My mouth went dry. You were just disobeying me, again." His voice was deadly calm now, which was always worse than the yelling. "After everything I do for you, after all the rules I set to protect you." "Robert, please," I whispered, backing away until the ironing board was between us. "It's just music. It keeps me company while I do my chores." "Company?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you need? Company? Am I not enough for you?" Before I could answer, he raised the radio over his head and brought it down on the edge of the coffee table. The crack it made was like a gunshot in our quiet living room. Pieces of red plastic scattered across the floor like drops of blood. Something inside me broke along with that radio. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the last thread of love I'd been desperately clinging to. Or maybe it was just the final illusion that things would ever get better. I stood there, staring at the shattered remains of my one small joy, and felt something new rise up in me. Not fear this time. Not the usual desperate need to placate him. This was different. This was a quiet, cold certainty that if I stayed, he would eventually kill me. "Clean this mess up," he ordered, already turning away, already dismissing me as he always did once he'd made his point. "And don't expect your parents to buy you another one. I've already told them how these programs are filling your head with rebellious ideas." I nodded, kneeling to gather the broken pieces, but inside, something had shifted. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't thinking about how to please Robert or how to avoid his anger. I was thinking about how to escape. That night, I lay beside him in our bed, listening to his even breathing, staring at the ceiling, and making plans. I couldn't go to my parents. Robert had made sure they believed any problems in our marriage were my fault. My old friends had long since stopped calling after one too many times when I'd had to cancel plans at the last minute because Robert suddenly needed me at home. Mrs. Thompson across the street had given me looks sometimes, concerned glances when she saw me wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer, or when she heard the shouting through our open windows. Once, she'd even stopped me when I was getting the mail and said, "If you ever need anything, dear, my door is always open." I'd smiled and thanked her and hurried back inside before Robert could see us talking. Now, lying in the dark, her words came back to me. My door is always open. Could I trust that? Could I risk it? I knew I couldn't just walk out the front door. Robert kept track of our money down to the last penny. I had no cash of my own, no credit cards, not even a checkbook. He drove me to the grocery store once a week and waited in the car while I shopped. He dropped me at my hair appointments and picked me up exactly 30 minutes later. My life was a series of scheduled movements, all controlled by him. But I had my wedding ring. The diamond wasn't large, but it was real. My grandmother's originally reset for me. It had to be worth something. Enough for a bus ticket, maybe. Enough to get me somewhere he couldn't find me. The next morning, after Robert left for work, I did something I'd never dared before. I walked to Mrs. Thompson's house and knocked on her door. She opened it with a surprised smile that faded quickly when she saw my face. I hadn't cried when Robert smashed my radio, hadn't shed a tear as I picked up the pieces. But standing on her doorstep, seeing the kindness in her eyes, something in me crumbled. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me inside and closing the door. "What did he do this time?" The words poured out of me then, 4 years of fear and pain and loneliness. I showed her the bruises on my arms, told her about the radio, confessed my plan to sell my ring and get on a bus to anywhere else. Mrs. Thompson, Martha, she insisted I call her, listened without interrupting. When I finally ran out of words, she took my hands in hers. "Ellie," she said gently, "you can't just run with nothing but the clothes on your back. You need a real plan, somewhere to go, someone to help you get on your feet." "I don't have anyone," I admitted, the hopelessness of my situation crashing back over me. "You have me," she said firmly. "My sister lives in Chicago. She'd take you in until you can find work." I stared at her, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. "Why would you help me? You barely know me." Martha's eyes clouded. "Because 20 years ago, I was you. Different husband, same story. Nobody helped me then. I promised myself if I ever saw another woman in that situation, I wouldn't look the other way." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of real hope. Not the desperate kind that keeps you going from day to day, but the solid kind that lets you see a future beyond your current pain. "He'll kill me if he finds out I'm planning to leave," I whispered. Martha nodded grimly. "That's why we have to be smart about this. You can't just disappear one day. He'd hunt you down. We need to make preparations, carefully." Over the next hour, we formed a plan. I would slowly, secretly gather a few essential belongings. Martha would keep them at her house. She would contact her sister in Chicago. When everything was ready, when Robert was at his most predictable, at work on a normal weekday, I would leave. "One more thing," Martha said, as I prepared to go back home before Robert could possibly return for lunch. "You need to start putting away a little money, even just a few dollars. Freedom isn't free, Ellie." I nodded, though I had no idea how I'd manage it. Robert counted the grocery change down to the last penny. Walking back to my house, I felt like a different woman than the one who had left it just hours before. For the first time in years, I had something precious and dangerous, a plan. Over the next 3 months, I became a secret agent in my own home. Every day was a careful dance of obedience on the surface and rebellion underneath. I'd never been much of an actress, but fear is a powerful teacher. I learned to smile at the right times, to keep my eyes downcast, to be the perfect submissive wife Robert thought he'd broken me into being. But inside, I was changing. Each day, I found small ways to prepare for my escape. When Robert gave me grocery money, I'd buy the cheaper brands and pocket the difference. Just pennies at first, then a quarter here, 50 cents there. I hid the money in an empty Pond's cold cream jar tucked behind the spare towels in the linen closet. Robert never looked there. Housework was women's business. Martha became my lifeline. On Tuesdays, when Robert worked late for the bank's management meeting, I'd slip across the street to her house. She taught me things I'd never learned: how to write a check, how to look for a job, how to apply for a library card without a husband's signature. Simple things that most women took for granted, but which had been forbidden to me. "My sister's got a spare room all ready for you," Martha told me one Tuesday in July. "And she knows a diner that's hiring waitresses. The pay's not much, but it's a start." A start. Those words echoed in my mind as I walked back home that evening. A new start in a new city, where Robert couldn't find me. Where I could be just Ellie again, not Mrs. Robert Wilson, not the perfect banker's wife with secrets hidden under her long sleeves. By August, I had nearly $60 saved, a fortune to me, who hadn't held more than a few coins in years. I had a small bag packed with essentials hidden at Martha's house. I had a bus ticket to Chicago, purchased by Martha's sister and waiting for me. All I needed was the perfect day to leave. The opportunity came sooner than I expected, and in a way I never could have planned. Robert had been more irritable than usual that week. The bank was doing some kind of audit, and he'd been staying late, coming home with his jaw clenched and his eyes hard. I walked on eggshells, making sure everything was perfect. His meals on time, his shirts pressed just so, the house spotless. Despite my precautions, he found fault with everything. The roast was too dry. The windows had streaks. I'd bought the wrong brand of his favorite whiskey. On Friday night, he came home later than usual. I heard his car pull into the driveway and felt the familiar knot of dread tighten in my stomach. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. I stood in the kitchen, a welcoming smile fixed on my face, my hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. One look at him told me everything I needed to know. His tie was loosened, his eyes bloodshot. He'd been drinking. Not unusual after a hard week, but the way he swayed slightly as he stood in the doorway told me this was different. He wasn't just unwinding with a drink or two. He was drunk, really drunk. "Where's dinner?" he demanded, his words slightly slurred. "Keeping warm in the oven," I replied, moving to get it. "I wasn't sure what time I'd what? Get home? Are you monitoring me now, Eleanor?" He spat my name like it was something sour. "No, of course not. You just what?" He stepped closer, and I caught the sour smell of whiskey on his breath. "You just thought you'd make me feel guilty? Is that it?" I backed up until I hit the counter. "No, Robert, I would never." "Don't lie to me." His fist came down on the table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. "You've been different lately. You think I haven't noticed? You think I'm stupid?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Did he know? Had he found my hidden money? Had someone seen me at Martha's? "I don't think you're stupid," I said carefully. "I think you're tired and hungry. Let me get your dinner." I tried to step around him, but he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "I got passed over for the promotion," he said, his voice suddenly quiet. "Johnson got it. That kiss-up, brown-nosing Johnson." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. A promotion would have put him in a better mood, might have eased some of the tension in our house. "Maybe next time." "Next time?" He laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "There won't be a next time. They said I'm too volatile, that I don't work well with others. That's code, you know. It means they think I'm not good enough." "You are good enough," I said automatically, the words I'd said 100 times before in 100 different situations. "Don't patronize me." He shoved me, hard enough that I stumbled back against the stove. The corner caught me in the back, a sharp pain that made me gasp. "This is your fault, you know. If I had a proper wife, a supportive wife, I'd have gotten that promotion." The unfairness of it stung more than the pain in my back. 4 years of taking the blame for his failures, his moods, his cruelty. 4 years of walking on eggshells and still getting crushed. Something snapped inside me. "That's not true," I said, my voice stronger than I'd intended. "You didn't get the promotion because of how you treat people, the same way you treat me." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Robert's face went completely still, a calm that was far more frightening than his rage. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. I should have backed down, should have apologized, placated him, done whatever was necessary to diffuse his anger. That's what I'd always done before. But something had changed in me. The woman who had been secretly saving pennies and planning her escape couldn't go back to being the doormat she'd been. "I said it's not my fault," I repeated, my voice shaking but clear. "It's yours." His hand moved so fast I didn't even see it coming. The blow caught me across the face, snapping my head back. I tasted blood where my teeth had cut into my cheek. Before I could recover, his hands were on my shoulders, shoving me backward. I fell, my head cracking against the tile floor, the world spinning around me. "You're absolutely right. We skipped Block 7, the emotional climax. Let me create that for you now." I don't remember getting up from the floor. I don't remember grabbing the heavy glass ashtray from the coffee table, but I do remember the sound it made as it connected with the side of Robert's head, a dull thud that seemed to echo through our silent house. He staggered backward, his hand going to his temple, where blood was already beginning to seep between his fingers. The look of shock on his face mirrored what I felt, disbelief that I, meek and obedient Ellie, had finally fought back. "You hit me," he said, his voice slurred with both alcohol and surprise. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other across the kitchen. The dynamic between us irrevocably changed. Then his shock gave way to fury. His face contorted into something inhuman, a mask of rage I'd seen too many times before. "You're going to regret that," he snarled, lunging toward me. I didn't think, I just ran. Through the kitchen, down the hallway, out the front door. I had no coat, no purse, no shoes, just the clothes on my back and the desperate instinct to get away. The asphalt was rough against my bare feet as I sprinted across the street to Martha's house, but I barely felt it. Terror is a powerful anesthetic. I pounded on her door, glancing over my shoulder to see Robert stumbling out of our house, blood trickling down the side of his face. "Eleanor!" he bellowed, his voice carrying through the quiet neighborhood. "Get back here right now!" Martha's porch light flicked on, and then her door opened. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Inside," she said sharply, pulling me through the doorway and locking it behind us. "Upstairs, back bedroom. Go now." I did as I was told, racing up the stairs as Martha grabbed her telephone. From the top of the stairs, I heard her speaking urgently. "Yes, officer, it's an emergency. My neighbor just ran to my house, bleeding and terrified. Her husband is outside right now, threatening her. Please hurry." I huddled in Martha's spare bedroom, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Through the window, I could see Robert in Martha's front yard, swaying drunkenly, still calling my name. The neighbors' lights were coming on one by one, curious faces appearing at windows, a few brave souls stepping onto their porches. Martha appeared in the doorway, a damp cloth in her hands. "Let me see your face," she said gently. Only then did I realize I was bleeding too. A cut on my lip, a bruise darkening on my cheekbone. "He's going to kill me," I whispered as she dabbed at the blood. "When he gets his hands on me, he's going to kill me." "That's not going to happen," Martha said with a conviction that almost made me believe her. "The police are on their way. You're not alone anymore, Ellie." Not alone. For 4 years, I'd been completely, utterly alone in my private hell. Even when surrounded by people, at church, at the grocery store, at Robert's bank functions, I'd been isolated by my secrets, by the carefully constructed facade of my perfect marriage. Now, sitting in Martha's spare bedroom with my bloodied lip and bare feet, I felt the first stirrings of connection, of being truly seen. The wail of police sirens cut through the night, drawing closer until the rotating blue lights splashed across the bedroom walls. I crept to the window, peering out to see 2 police cars pulling up in front of Martha's house. Robert was still in the yard, but now he straightened, trying to compose himself, to transform back into the respectable bank employee that everyone in town knew. "Mrs. Thompson?" a deep voice called from downstairs. "Springfield Police Department." "Up here, officer," Martha called back. In the spare bedroom, heavy footsteps on the stairs, and then a tall policeman appeared in the doorway, his expression grim as he took in my battered face. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Dawson. Are you all right?" The concern in his voice, the simple human kindness of the question, broke something open inside me. Tears came in a flood, years of pent-up fear and pain pouring out. I couldn't speak, could only shake my head as the sobs racked my body. Martha sat beside me on the bed, her arm around my shoulders. "She's not all right, officer," she said firmly. "But she will be. Her husband is the man outside, Robert Wilson from First National. He's been abusing her for years." Officer Dawson's face hardened. "Mr. Wilson is claiming that his wife attacked him with an ashtray, unprovoked. Says she's been unstable lately." A fresh wave of panic washed over me. Of course, Robert would twist things, would make himself the victim. He'd always been good at that, presenting one face to the world while showing a very different one to me behind closed doors. That's not what happened, I managed to choke out between sobs. He hit me first. He's been hitting me for years. The officer knelt in front of me, his voice gentler now. Mrs. Wilson, I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight. Take your time. So I did. I told him about Robert coming home drunk, about the argument over the missed promotion, about the blow that had sent me crashing to the floor. I told him about grabbing the ashtray in desperation, about running for my life across the street. Then, haltingly at first, then in a rush of pent-up words, I told him about the rest of it. The 4 years of escalating abuse, the control, the isolation, the fear that had become my constant companion. I pulled up my sleeves to show the fingerprint bruises on my arms, turned to reveal the older bruises on my back. Officer Dawson wrote it all down in his notebook, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. Mrs. Wilson, he said when I finally fell silent, what your husband has done to you is criminal assault. We can arrest him right now, tonight, based on your statement and injuries. Arrest Robert? The idea seemed impossible. Robert Wilson, respected bank employee, church deacon, upstanding member of the community, in handcuffs. Who would believe my word against his? As if reading my thoughts, Martha squeezed my shoulder. Tell him, Ellie. Tell the truth. It's time. I looked out the window again. Another officer was talking to Robert, who was gesturing angrily toward Martha's house. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, watching the drama unfold. My private shame had become very public indeed. A strange calm settled over me. There was no going back now, no returning to the life I'd had this morning. Whatever happened next, I was already free in the most important way. I had broken my silence. Yes, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I want to press charges. Officer Dawson nodded once, standing up. Wait here. I'll be back shortly. Through the window, I watched as he went to confer with his colleague. Then, both officers approached Robert. There was a brief, heated exchange, and then, to my utter disbelief, Robert's hands were being secured behind his back. He looked up at Martha's house as they led him to the police car, his eyes finding mine in the window. The hatred in his gaze would have terrified me just hours before. Now, I simply stared back, unflinching. He's really being arrested, I whispered, watching as the officers placed him in the back of the patrol car. I can't believe it. Believe it, Martha said, her arm still around my shoulders. This is just the first step, Ellie. It won't be easy, but you're not going back to that house. Not ever. As the police car pulled away, taking Robert with it, I felt something crack open inside me. Not the breaking of something solid, but the opening of a door long shut. Air rushed into lungs that had been holding their breath for years. What do I do now? I asked, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened, of what lay ahead. Martha's answer was simple. Now, you live, she said. One day at a time, you live. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains when I finally opened my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The bed was softer than mine, the room smaller. Then it all came rushing back. Robert's rage, the ashtray, my desperate flight through the night, Martha's kindness. I was in Martha's spare bedroom. I was safe. The realization brought fresh tears to my eyes. A soft knock at the door made me quickly wipe them away. Martha entered, carrying a breakfast tray with toast, eggs, and a steaming cup of coffee. The normality of it, breakfast in bed, like I was a guest on vacation, seemed absurd after everything that had happened. You're awake, she said, setting the tray on the nightstand. How are you feeling? I touched my cheek, wincing at the tenderness there. Like I've been hit by a truck. Officer Dawson will be here at 10, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. He's an old friend of my late husband's. He'll help us sort this out. Panic fluttered in my chest. The police? Martha, I can't. You can and you will, she said firmly. What Robert did to you isn't just wrong, Ellie. It's against the law. I'd never thought of it that way. In my mind, what happened behind closed doors was private, a shameful secret to be hidden, not a crime to be reported. But the determined look on Martha's face told me this wasn't up for discussion. Officer Dawson arrived precisely at 10, a barrel-chested man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He sat in Martha's living room, notebook open, as I haltingly told my story. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just wrote down everything with a face that grew increasingly grim. Mrs. Wilson, he said when I finished, what your husband did constitutes assault and battery. We can file charges against him. The thought of facing Robert in court, of everyone knowing our private shame, made me physically ill. I don't want that, I said. I just want to leave, to start over somewhere else. Officer Dawson exchanged a look with Martha that I couldn't quite interpret. That's your right, he said finally. But at the very least we need to document your injuries and take a statement, and I'm going to recommend an order of protection. I didn't even know what that was, but I nodded anyway, too numb to argue. The next few hours passed in a blur. Photographs of my bruises, a formal statement typed up by a sympathetic female secretary at the police station, paperwork I barely understood but signed anyway. By late afternoon, I was back at Martha's house, exhausted but with an official piece of paper that said Robert Wilson could not come within 500 feet of me without risking arrest. He'll be served with the order today, Officer Dawson told me before he left. I'll do it personally. I've also arranged for an officer to accompany you to your house tomorrow to collect your belongings. Your husband will not be permitted on the premises during that time. It seemed impossible that the law would stand between me and Robert, that I would be protected from his rage. In all our years together, it had never occurred to me that I had rights, that what he did to me wasn't just cruel, but criminal. What about Chicago? I asked Martha that evening as we sat at her kitchen table, drinking tea like two normal women having a normal conversation. Your sister? The job at the diner? Martha reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That option is still there if you want it. But Ellie, you don't have to run away anymore. You can stay right here in Springfield if you choose. The law is on your side now. The idea was so foreign I could barely grasp it. Stay in Springfield? Where Robert could find me? Where people knew me as his wife? Where I'd have to face the whispers and stares of neighbors who'd suddenly know our secret? I need to think, I said, my head spinning with options I'd never thought I'd have. The next day, Officer Reynolds, a young patrolman with freckles who looked barely old enough to drive, escorted me to my house, my home, the place that had been both haven and prison for 4 years. It felt smaller somehow, stepping through the front door with a police officer at my side. The living room where I'd been knocked to the floor countless times. The kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals under the weight of Robert's expectations. The bedroom where I'd lain awake planning my escape. Take your time, ma'am, Officer Reynolds said, standing awkwardly by the door. I'll be right here if you need anything. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, collecting the pieces of my life. Clothes, a few photographs, my mother's recipe box. I took only what was undeniably mine, things Robert couldn't claim I'd stolen. The wedding ring I left on the dresser. Let him pawn it for drinking money. I didn't want it anymore. In the linen closet, behind the spare towels, my Pond's cold cream jar still held my secret savings, nearly $60 that represented countless small acts of rebellion. I tucked it into my purse, a strange sense of pride swelling in my chest. This money was mine, earned through sacrifice and courage. As I was leaving, I noticed something I'd almost forgotten, a small photograph in a simple frame tucked on a bookshelf. Me at 18. Standing in front of my parents' house, smiling with the untroubled confidence of youth. I barely recognized that girl with her bright eyes and easy smile. On impulse, I added it to my bag. All set? Officer Reynolds asked as I came back to the living room, my life packed into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. I took one last look around the house that had been my prison for 4 years. The curtains I'd sewn, the furniture I'd polished, the floors I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees. None of it mattered anymore. "Yes," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "I'm ready." Back at Martha's house, I sorted through my belongings, organizing what I'd need immediately and what could be shipped later. The decision I'd been avoiding pressed on me with increasing urgency: stay in Springfield or go to Chicago. Face my past or flee from it. "There's no wrong answer," Martha told me as we sat on her porch that evening, watching the streetlights come on. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." In the quiet of that summer evening, with cicadas singing in the trees and the distant sound of children being called home for dinner, I found my answer. "I want to go to Chicago," I said finally. "Not because I'm running away, but because I want to see who I can be without him, without anyone telling me who I am or what I'm worth." Martha nodded, understanding in her eyes. "When do you want to leave?" "As soon as possible," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. "Tomorrow, if I can." Martha squeezed my hand. "Then tomorrow it is." The Greyhound bus pulled into Chicago just as the sun was setting, painting the unfamiliar skyline in shades of gold and pink. I pressed my face to the window, taking in the vastness of it all. The tall buildings reaching toward the sky, the streets teeming with people, the endless possibilities stretching out before me. Springfield suddenly seemed like a tiny speck in my rearview mirror. Martha's sister Helen was waiting at the bus station, holding a hand-lettered sign with my name on it. She looked so much like Martha that I recognized her instantly. The same kind eyes, the same no-nonsense set to her mouth. She enveloped me in a hug as soon as I stepped off the bus, as if we were old friends, reuniting rather than strangers meeting for the first time. "Welcome to Chicago, Ellie," she said, helping me with my suitcase. "You're safe now." Safe. The word still felt foreign on my tongue, a concept I'd nearly forgotten in my years with Robert. Could I really be safe? Could I really start over? Helen's apartment was small but cozy, on the 3rd floor of a brick building in a neighborhood she called Rogers Park. The spare room she'd prepared for me had fresh flowers on the dresser and a view of Lake Michigan in the distance. It was the nicest thing anyone had done for me in years. "It's not much," Helen apologized, showing me where to hang my clothes in the tiny closet. "But it's yours for as long as you need it." That night, I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the city, car horns, distant music, voices calling to each other on the street below. So different from the quiet of my neighborhood in Springfield. So different from lying next to Robert, measuring my breaths to avoid disturbing him. The next morning, Helen took me to the diner where she'd arranged a job for me. The Sunshine Cafe was a classic Chicago diner. Counter seating with red vinyl stools, booths along the windows, the air heavy with the smell of coffee and bacon. "This is Ellie," Helen told the manager, a heavy-set woman named Gladys, with bottle-red hair and hands that looked like they'd never been idle a day in her life. "The friend from Springfield I told you about." Gladys looked me up and down, her gaze lingering briefly on the fading bruise on my cheek. Something like understanding flashed in her eyes, quickly replaced by brisk efficiency. "Ever waited tables before?" she asked. "No, ma'am," I admitted, "but I'm a quick learner." She nodded once, decisive. $6 a day plus tips, 6 days a week, Tuesdays off. We open at 6, but I need you here at 5:30 to help with setup. Can you handle that?" $6 a day. More money than I'd been allowed to hold at one time in years. "Yes, ma'am, I can handle that." "Good. You start tomorrow. Helen will show you where to get uniforms." And just like that, I had a job. My job. Money that I would earn and spend as I saw fit. The enormity of it made me dizzy. The first few weeks were the hardest. My feet ached from standing all day. My hands cracked and bled from the harsh soap we used to clean the counters. I dropped plates, mixed up orders, and cried in the bathroom during my breaks. But I didn't quit. Couldn't quit. This job was my lifeline, my first step toward independence. Slowly, I found my rhythm. I learned the regular customers, Mr. Kowalski, who always ordered rye toast with his eggs, Mrs. Patel, who wanted her coffee with exactly 2 ice cubes to cool it down, the group of taxi drivers who came in at the end of the night shift, hungry and full of stories. I learned to balance 6 plates along my arm, to remember orders without writing them down, to smile through exhaustion. And the tips, quarters and dimes and sometimes even dollar bills, all mine to keep. I saved most of it, still paranoid that it might all disappear, still unable to believe this freedom was permanent. But occasionally, I'd treat myself. A new lipstick, a movie ticket, a paperback novel to read during my breaks. Helen never pushed me to talk about Springfield or Robert, but sometimes, in the quiet evenings when we'd both finished work, I'd find myself telling her things. Small things at first. How Robert insisted I iron his underwear. How he'd check the odometer on the car if I drove anywhere. How he'd make me rewash dishes if he found a single water spot. Then bigger things. The punishments, the isolation, the fear that had been my constant companion. "You're not the first woman to go through this," Helen told me one night as we sat at her kitchen table drinking tea. "And sadly, you won't be the last. But you got out, Ellie. You survived. That makes you one of the strong ones." Strong. Another word I never would have used to describe myself. In Springfield, I'd been weak, helpless, broken. But here in Chicago, with each passing day, I felt something new growing inside me. Not just strength, but a sense of self I'd nearly forgotten. 3 months after I arrived in Chicago, I received a letter from Martha. Robert had finally been served with divorce papers. He'd shown up at her house, drunk and raging, demanding to know where I was. The police had arrested him for violating the restraining order. He'd spent 2 nights in jail. "He's telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown," Martha wrote, "that you ran off with another man. No one believes him, of course. Mrs. Grayson from church told him right to his face that she always thought he was a bully. I wish you could have seen his expression." I read the letter twice, searching for any trace of the fear that had once paralyzed me at the mere thought of Robert's anger. Instead, I felt only a distant pity for the small, angry man who had once dominated my every waking moment. By Christmas, I had saved enough for my own apartment, a tiny studio not far from the diner with just enough room for a bed, a table, and a comfortable chair by the window. Helen helped me find it, co-signed the lease, and helped me move in. My first night there, surrounded by the few possessions that were truly mine, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "It's not much," I told Helen as she helped me hang curtains, bright yellow ones I'd chosen myself. "But it's mine." She smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes that's enough." And it was. My small apartment, my job at the diner, my growing circle of friends. These simple things that most people took for granted were precious to me. Each represented a choice I'd made freely, a small act of self-determination after years of having no choices at all. The divorce became final in the spring of 1965. I marked the occasion by buying myself a ring, not a diamond, just a simple silver band that represented my marriage to my new life, my commitment to myself. I would never again let someone else define my worth or control my destiny. It's been nearly 50 years since I stepped off that Greyhound bus in Chicago, with nothing but 2 suitcases and a heart full of fear and hope. 50 years of building a life on my own terms, one day at a time. I'm 74 now, with silver hair and hands that tell the story of a life well lived. Sometimes I can hardly believe how far I've come from that frightened young woman who thought her worth was measured by a man's approval. After a year at the Sunshine Cafe, Gladys promoted me to assistant manager. I still remember the day she handed me the keys to open up on my own. "Don't make me regret this, Ellie," she'd said gruffly. But I could see the pride in her eyes, pride in me. It was intoxicating. By 1970, with Gladys's encouragement, I'd enrolled in night classes at the community college. Business administration. Me, Eleanor Jane Wilson, who'd barely been allowed to read a magazine without permission, sitting in a classroom with other adults, learning about accounting and management principles. I'd come home to my little apartment after class, my head swimming with new ideas, and think, Robert would never believe this. Eventually, I stopped measuring my life against what Robert would think. He became smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror until one day I realized I'd gone a whole month without thinking of him at all. That was a victory sweeter than any diploma. In 1975, with a business certificate in hand and 10 years of restaurant experience under my belt, I took the biggest risk of my life. With a small business loan and every penny I'd saved, I opened my own place, Ellie's Kitchen, a cozy breakfast and lunch spot just 3 blocks from where I'd stepped off that bus a decade earlier. Those early years as a business owner nearly broke me. 16-hour days, supplier problems, staff turnover. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But each morning, I'd get up before dawn, put on my apron, and try again. No one was standing over me, telling me I wasn't good enough. The only voice in my head was my own, and gradually, I learned to make it a kind one. Ellie's Kitchen became something of a neighborhood institution. Nothing fancy, just good food served with care. I hired other women like me when I could. Women with bruises they tried to hide, with gaps in their resumes, with a desperate need for a second chance. Some stayed for years, others just long enough to get on their feet. All of them became part of my chosen family. I never remarried. There were men, of course. Kind men who took me to dinner or the movies, who held my hand and respected my boundaries. But I'd tasted freedom, the sweet independence of answering to no one but myself, and I couldn't imagine giving that up again. Besides, I had created a family of my own, not children of my body, but people I'd chosen to love, and who had chosen to love me back. Helen remained my dearest friend until cancer took her in 1989. Martha moved to Chicago in her later years after her arthritis got too bad for her to manage alone in Springfield. She lived in the apartment above my restaurant until she passed peacefully in her sleep in 2001. I think of them both every day, the sisters who saved me, who showed me what real family looks like. I sold the restaurant 5 years ago when my own arthritis made the long hours too difficult. The new owners kept the name, kept most of the menu, even kept the faded photograph of me at 18 that I'd hung behind the counter all those years. For inspiration, I'd tell curious customers, a reminder of how far I've come. Last month, I found myself back in Springfield for the first time in nearly half a century. My niece, my brother's daughter, was getting married, and family is family, even when separated by decades and miles. The town had changed, as all places do with time. The Woolworths where I'd met Robert was gone, replaced by some chain store. My old neighborhood looked smaller somehow, the houses more modest than I remembered. On an impulse, I drove past our old house, mine and Robert's. A young family lives there now. Children's bicycles in the driveway, cheerful curtains in the windows. I sat in my rental car for a long moment, looking at the place that had once been my prison. It held no power over me anymore. It was just a house, wood and brick and glass, nothing more. I learned later from my brother that Robert had died in 1983, alone in a nursing home, his liver finally giving out after years of hard drinking. I felt no joy at the news, no sense of justice or vindication, only a quiet sadness for all the might-have-beens, for the decent man he could have been if he'd fought his demons instead of taking them out on me. If there's one thing I've learned in my 74 years on this earth, it's that no woman deserves to live in fear. No woman should wake up each morning wondering what mood her partner will be in, what invisible line she might cross, what punishment awaits her. Love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't control. Love doesn't diminish. I've kept only one thing from my marriage, a small newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, announcing our engagement. 2 smiling young people with their whole lives ahead of them. I keep it not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I gained. The courage to walk away, the strength to build a new life, the wisdom to know my own worth. My story isn't special. There are women living it right now, behind closed doors in nice neighborhoods, putting on brave faces while dying inside. If you're one of them, please know this. There is life after leaving. There is joy and peace and a kind of strength you can't imagine until you find it within yourself. The first step is the hardest, but I promise you, it gets easier, and you are worth every difficult step. And that was my story. Now I want to know, where are you all listening from? Comment below and tell me what state you're in. God bless you all. Every time I share my story, whether with a frightened woman sitting at my restaurant counter or now with all of you, I'm reminded that our darkest moments don't define us. It's what we do after, how we rebuild, how we rise, that truly matters. Whether you're in California or Maine, Texas or Oregon, I hope something in my journey speaks to you. We're all just walking each other home, as they say, sharing our light when the path gets dark for someone else. Thank you for walking with me for a while today.